Hey everyone, welcome to the KE Report. A couple interviews this week are going to be live from the floor of the New Orleans Investment Conference that Chad and I attended at the tail end of last week. Over the weekend show, the first couple of segments were with Byron King. That was recorded live from the floor of the conference. And this interview today, also recorded live from the floor of the conference with Jim Paterson, co-founder and principal of Discovery Group. Jim and I sat down early in the conference to more just get his insights on the junior market when it comes to equities. We talk financing, we talk exploration, we talk permitting and M&A. There's a lot of insights that Jim provides us, more from the corporate level and not just from one individual company or one individual resource. Jim does assist a lot of the Discovery Group companies in a number of different avenues. So getting his insights on where he sees this market, I think, is invaluable to investors. So without further ado, here is the conversation I had with Jim at the New Orleans Investment Conference. All right, sitting down now with Jim Paterson. Jim, it's always nice to sit down with you at these conferences and more catch up on what you're seeing in terms of market moves.
Great to see you too.
So Jim, look, you're with Discovery Group. You have a range of companies here. A lot of I think investors right now are focused on precious metals because of what gold has been doing, hitting, I think it's 40, 50 all-time highs, daily all-time highs just this year. We're not seeing the same follow through maybe in the wide range of the equities, but overall from the precious metals standpoint, from the metals price, it's doing its job. Have you seen an environment like this in your history in the sector where precious metals have been running like this?
Yeah, I mean, it's all relative pricing, obviously. One thing I have seen before is when the underlying commodity prices are running and the equity values are not following along. And then before you know it, sometimes things change. The price of the equity starts really rocking with something happens and change of sentiment where people start piling into the equities, and then we get a bull run in the equities as well, but we're not there yet.
When does that change happen? What causes that change?
No one can cause it. No one has a crystal ball.
But sometimes we hear like a discovery will really help out the sector. We've had some good discoveries in the sector. Those stocks have run. Doesn't seem like it's brought in a wider range of, I guess, investors.
I guess it really depends. I mean, a discovery, not all discoveries are equal, let's say. Depending on the country, depending on the shareholders, depending on how much they promote that discovery, it may or may not attract large audiences to come in and start buying other stocks. I mean, you know when you're in a bull run where equity or retail investors, just like mining, they think all mining stocks are similar to gold stocks and everything gets bought. Right now they're a lot more discerning, and I think there are certainly capital sources that are without competition right now. They're able to put money in. You were kind of talking a little bit before, like what's the cost of capital? The cost of equity capital is still very high.
Yeah.
There's not frothy yet. It gives investors lots of time to think about it, make good sound decisions. They don't have to rush into anything. They can pick their favorite companies and buy them over time and get good prices. So it's good for investors right now.
Let's stick on this whole cost of capital, the fundraising environment, because there has been a fair bit of money raised this year, but it's really gone into a limited number of companies. If you can raise money, man, these companies have raised a lot. They seem to always have a major backer behind them. They have a strategic shareholder that can provide that liquidity. What are you seeing on the fund side of things? Precious metals funds, resource funds?
They're being very discerning. Obviously, they want to support their own deals. If they're already in something, they want that project to be advanced. Why spread their money and their resources around to other funds when they want to support the projects they've done a lot of due diligence on and made a decision? So I would think that, people are fairly focused right now on projects that they're really comfortable with and know very well and want to support, have a vested interest in that project succeeding or that company succeeding.
No, with the range of companies that Discovery Group has, how do you go about balancing when you do have money, spending it, but still having that cushion in case, again, this financing environment does get even more difficult?
I've been in the business since 1997. I don't think I've ever been at an exploration company where we've had the luxury to, let's say, raise $2 million worth of budget. It's always been very difficult to raise. You raise as much as you can, and it's never enough to kind of plan for 2 or 3 years. It's a luxury that I've never been afforded. So
So that's the same market that we're in, though.
That's
Hey,
the same market
that
we're in,
is
right?
just the market. But it seems like exploring has gotten so much more expensive too. Costs have gone up for companies across the board. I've heard from some companies you're better off going out there and acquiring projects, acquiring assets, rather than trying to drill them and build them yourself. What's your take on that whole notion?
It sounds great when you say it, but then when you go out and try to do a deal with another company, people always get in the way of a deal, even though it might make sense on paper. And when you're looking at the two projects or companies with, let's say, a portfolio that seems like it would be pretty simpatico to put together, then there's always some problem with one of the managers who doesn't want to lose their job, or maybe a shareholder who thinks they should get a penny more, or a director that perhaps doesn't have any skin in the game and they just are a cynic. So that happens a lot, but I believe M&A will heat up, and I actually do think it's cheaper to buy than explore right now, because the equity values are so low. And so, if you really did have an industry that needed to get off its ass and be more active, I believe M&A would be a great way to bring exposure, greed, bankers getting paid, investors getting excited. And really, in a good deal, capital gets freed up or unlocked. So it's worth working on good M&A, because I think it just really lights up the sector.
Fair enough. Hey, less companies I think would be better, but there's that balance, right? There's so many projects out there. So is it about bringing more projects under one company, or is it about losing some of these projects altogether from the sector?
It's both of those. That's a good point. And I think I've mentioned this before, I'm not sure if we've even talked about it, Corey, several years ago, but when times are really good, stupid projects get financed. They never deserve money. They should never be funded, ever. They burn money. They send money to heaven. Yep. So I think, in a bad market, what happens is if your project isn't amazing, it doesn't deserve money right now.
Yeah. Fair. How do you know what project deserves money then? If you're exploring an early stage project, it can be hard, right? You don't really know what you're going after. If it's more advanced stage, it has some drilling already in it. How do you decipher what is worth still putting money into?
I think it's having the time right now, like we do, to go back and look at the source technical reports, look at all the data that's been generated, and see if something was missed. And I think that would be the great way. I mean, it's free from your desk to do these reviews and data reviews, but I think that's where you really unlock value in a bad market, not spending money on exploration necessarily. But in markets like this, exploration is hard to come by. So those companies that can raise capital, and Discovery Group is always able to raise money for exploration, because we haven't been pretending over the years that we are mine builders, for example. Now we're going to shift to exploration. And we've always done this. It's difficult to raise money, but we found people that will back us, so we can always do it. But we always start, what did somebody miss in previous exploration campaigns? Of course, that doesn't apply if it's a brand new area of the world, and then you're basically collecting the data for the first time.
Yeah, fair. Like early stage projects, right?
Yeah.
There's tons of blue sky, but it's all blue sky. There's no underlying, sometimes, value to the asset. When it comes to resources, though, we used to talk about 1 million ounces being a big driver. Oh, that's a big stepping stone. To me, it feels like almost every company has 1 million ounces nowadays, because there has been the lack of either building assets or taking them over. What's the resource size that moves the needle in your eyes?
I think there's so much more. Like, every 1 million ounce deposit is not equal. So what are the recovery rates? What's the strip ratio? Where is it located? What's the permitting environment? These issues can drag a project on forever, or make it really fast and high margin to put into production. So I think you have to look, 1 million ounces of low-grade material that's difficult from a metallurgical perspective, that's located in, for example, British Columbia, might just be a totally, terribly complicated thing, and it's worth nothing.
Yeah, well, now the problem is people will put out economic studies at current metals prices and say, look at how much money it makes.
Yeah.
But I think you'd always need to compare it one-to-one with other assets and go with the high margin assets. Easier said than done, though. Now, as much as the market's focused on gold, because gold is well over $2,000, was very close to $3,000 recently, what about other metals? What have you heard on more the corporate side of things, either from potential people to give you money, to fundraise, to even acquire these projects? What other metals are out there that you have a feeling that something's happening?
I still love gold dearly. But what I do think is what's happening are companies are positioning formerly gold projects as copper gold projects. And what that's doing is allowing them to get big financing packages from the European Union members or off-takers that really want that copper, that electric metal type of credit, let's say. So I think the way that we position projects can change based upon the commodity prices or the flavor of the month.
We've seen that.
But I just absolutely there's nothing better than gold. There isn't. There isn't. Many people obviously say in a big booming economic upturn, you really want to have Dr. Copper. You definitely want that, but I'm just such a believer in that gold never goes out of fashion. You'll always have investors for it, and there'll always be uses for it. And it's something that, one thing you look back on and say, this at 2,500 or 2,800 gold, this thing's got to work. I mean, I think it's like a lot of these projects have been around for a while. You can go back 20 years, and that project will have still been being explored or developed or whatever, and at the price, maybe gold was at 300 or 500 or something like that. But look at the associated costs associated with. They're a lot lower in those reports. They've skyrocketed. So 2,800 gold may or may not work. Well, with cost creep these days. So back to your question, I'm a big lover in gold. I do think that there are now, I guess one point I'd make is there are a lot more investors now after the last 5 years in critical minerals, like the lithiums of the world, even copper, zinc. There are people out there that because of those policy and regulatory changes that were made at a governmental level, like a supranational level, that's caused a lot of bigger investors to focus on critical minerals and other metals other than gold.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's been huge for the sector too, just to see how supportive governments actually can be to some mining, because all we constantly hear is just how unsupportive, how restrictive they are towards mining. That ties into permitting though, because boy oh boy, we hear a lot about companies, we need to get permitting done. We need to focus on permitting. It's cheap, so that helps rather than going out with big drill programs. But how do you balance out having permitting on the go, but then still drilling, still trying to expand a current asset?
Permitting is unbelievably complicated, and what we're seeing right now, we have projects going all over the place, all over the world. And there are certain places in the world where because of, for example, the electric metal type of critical minerals type of influence, from a policy perspective, they're trying to reopen mining in several countries that really had no mining before. And it's interesting because Canada, United States, Chile, Argentina, Mexico, there's established Ministry of Mines that have permitted hundreds, if not thousands of mines. And the experience level is, the well is deep, let's say. But some of these countries that, are sort of emerging as mining districts now, the permitting process is a little slower and it's bureaucratic. They don't want to make mistakes with their first project that they're permitting. So things can take 5 years, where in Canada, literally you can do it overnight in your underwear on the internet when you want to, get a mining claim. We've had some success recently in France, but it took us many years in one of our companies.
You're telling me about this new private company that you have with the project in France. We haven't seen anybody with the project in France.
Exactly. I'm not going to tell you too much about that right now. We're working away, but the timing is, years difference than in Canada, for example, with permitting. So it's a major issue. It's a major issue. Something that takes you 5 years versus something that takes you 5 minutes. That's a big difference.
Oh, it's a huge difference. Yeah. But where is good to permit then? Is it simply Canada? Canada can drag on too. Where do you see one of the best environments for permitting? Or is there an easy answer to that?
Well, I would like to just double back. Just because something takes long, it doesn't mean it's bad. It's just, if you understand how long it will take. But once it's done, if it's set in stone and you can rely upon it, it's very different than receiving a permit fast and then changing their mind because they don't have the political fortitude or the intestinal fortitude to stand by the permit that they've granted. Things get changed. And it's happened a few times in a few different countries where people thought they had a permitted project and somebody else came out of the woodwork and disrupted it. Investors do not like that.
Yeah.
They don't mind taking a long time as long as they know the devil they're dealing with.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Well, within Discovery Group then, you have, again, a handful of companies in a handful of different metals. where have you seen the most interest from investors, either retail or institutional?
There's a lot of interest for sure from an institutional perspective and a global perspective in the critical minerals like defense and copper like Kodiak. But I will say that there's a heck of a lot of interest in gold. We have a company called Valor, and we've got a PGM or palladium platinum project in Brazil. And I must be honest, it's a little more difficult to find palladium and platinum investors right now. But what we are seeing is people sniffing around as contrarians. So it's not a huge volume of people, but like people are taking deep dives and starting to take a long position in metals they think like lithium might be oversold or palladium and platinum might be oversold, and they're taking positions. But no one's gobbling up stock right now. The institutions are not piling in, let's say, to anything other than gold in my mind.
Yeah. Hey, we're seeing that. We have seen some volume spikes in GDX and GDXJ, which have been encouraging, but broadly volume's been relatively low. Let's break down the equity side of things, because we constantly hear how much the equities are lagging gold because gold's at all-time highs. There has been a lot of these equities, especially the juniors, have really been lagging. There's a handful of majors that are doing well. Not all the majors are at all-time highs. Mid-tiers have been doing reasonably well, but it's a mixed bag too. Have you seen this environment before where it does seem like we have some leadership by the big companies, but it hasn't trickled down in any significant sense to smaller companies?
I think it's normally like this, and occasionally we get glimmers of hope. You know, it's generally a really hard business where capital is hard to find. And major mining companies aren't ever the savior. You know, like...
Don't depend on the majors, hey? That's interesting.
You can't, because they have a different pace. Their shareholders are totally different than your shareholders. You know, in junior companies, the smaller companies, usually the management team are big shareholders. They've got a desire to move fast. And a major mining company just has a different time scale. So they're not like saving the industry. I remember when in the depths of the bottoms of the uranium sector, Cameco could have literally bought the entire sector for cash. Every single company on the planet. And they didn't. They didn't even buy any. It's insane.
Yeah.
So, they're not there to save you.
So then, what about M&A then? If a junior is looking to get acquired, who do they look to? Who's going to do that acquiring?
Well, my perspective is if you kind of can look down the road a bit and do the work on behalf of a major. So instead of maybe just wanting them to buy you, but you take the initiative to cobble together 3 or 4 other companies and you can put together a pipeline. The pipeline might be much more interesting to them because it has greater scale. You'd have a team that might work on a pipeline and be more efficient than an expert that has to work on one small little junior. So I'm not sure if it's going to work. That's what I'm trying to do, is build that pipeline and be creative where majors can't be. Okay. We'll create the product that they need, which is a bigger product with more assets, a portfolio, say.
So do you look for majors to invest at an equity level then, or a project level to help fund some of that exploration work that you're doing?
Well, I've had experience with both of those things. I think for example, Prospector and Rob Carpenter's company was born out of Kaminak before Kaminak had its big success with coffee and was taken over by Goldcorp for that coffee project. They were a prospect generator, so we cut our teeth doing deals with major mining companies, convincing them to earn in on our projects through an option agreement. And it takes a lot of work to do that. If you only had one property, for example, as a mineral explorer, and then you auction that off, I think your shareholders would punish you because you've sort of capped the upside. But if you have 5 projects, it's great to bring a partner in for one or a couple of those, depending upon maybe you have kind of a jurisdictional focus or something and they want to do a deal on a few different projects. That's really helpful. It allows you to keep your technical team employed and busy and off the streets and really focus on the project. We do see major mining companies taking small positions, but not as much as you'd think they'd be doing right now.
I know.
We think they would just be greedy right now, but they're not.
I
couldn't hold down a job at a big company, so I have no idea how they think. I'm unemployable.
Hey, you're employing a lot of people, though, so I give you credit for that.
I do my best.
So overall, your take from this market, you've been to this conference a number of years. I've been here for a decade. It's similar size that we have seen in past years. It's not the same excitement that we've seen maybe at the full bull market run. Does it mean that we have longer to run in this market, or do we need to take a step back and realize that the sector, while it's around, might not reach some of those levels that we had when gold was on TV and people were waving signs in the street saying, "I'll buy your gold"?
No, I actually think that the audience that previously watched those TV commercials and maybe reacted to them was a different audience. Right now, we have the ability to appeal to global audiences through the internet that are different ages. You know, we'll see just crazy stuff coming out of nowhere where some dude who lives in New Jersey who's posting on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, and he does something as limited as, "I like this stock, this is the ticker," and millions of shares will trade. So these things come out of nowhere, really, and there's just access to much more rapidly moving audiences where we could not reach them previously. So I think if the universe senses that gold equities will start to move, our industry is almost too small to handle the amount of money that will flow into it, and you'll get stock prices going bananas.
Yeah, that's what we're all waiting for, isn't
We're
it?
waiting.
That's why we're here.
We're here. But I think it's great for investors because they can just take their time, they can accumulate a position in companies they really like, and they will feel they got a great price.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that run does come. Some stocks have run, right? This is one of the better environments that I have seen while being in this sector. It's just not all the equities are keeping pace with the gold price, but maybe there's that catch up there, and maybe, quite frankly, just stick to the better companies too.
Why not?
Yeah, that's more the takeaway that I have. Well, hey, it's great sitting down with you, Jim. Thank you very much for taking some time in this conference. That's why I love these conferences.